The combat in Hogwarts Legacy is by far one of my favourite things about the game. However, it's not without its challenges. Especially as a bit of a nutcase who put the game on hard mode for his first playthrough, the combat definitely has some areas which, as a beginner, I wish I knew about before I went into it. And in this video, I'm going to do exactly that, but I'm not just going to give you generic tips that really aren't going to help you. I've picked out 5 things I think are going to be of actual benefit to you, even though they are more basic because this is for beginners who are just getting into it. They are things that even if you've been well versed in combat so far, you're going to want to remember so that you don't mess up on those little finer details. And what we'll do is that if you find this video helpful, drop a like on it, and when we get to 100 likes, I'll create an advanced tips so that we can take our next step with the combat, which, trust me, you're going to need as the game progresses. But for now, this is 5 combat tips for beginners in Hogwarts Legacy. Now, tip number 1 is something they don't really teach you, but you'll learn is a very big problem if you continue to do this. So tip number 1 is to not rush and work on the timing of your spells. Especially early on in the game, you only have 4 spells that you can pick from, and when it comes to combat, you only really have 2 for the start of the game. You eventually pick up a 3rd, and then later on, a couple hours in, you'll pick up a 4th. But still, you don't have a lot of spells. So until you unlock more spells and more spell diamonds, you have to be very conservative about those 4 spells because some of them have a fairly long cooldown. Not to mention some enemies have a very particular shield around them, which you'll need a specific spell to combat and break before you can deal damage to them. So timing your spells and making sure you have your spells up and ready to use is very important. So how does this become an actual useful tip for you? Well, you need to spend as much time as possible using basic cast attacks before you use your next spell, and there is a specific timing to this. Certain spells like the first 2 you learn in the game, Levioso and Accio, will propel enemies into the air that you can then do damage to while they're airborne. It takes exactly 4 shots before they will then hit the ground, and that is the perfect timing you need before using your next spell. So I'll paint the picture. Let's say you use Levioso to break this particular enemy's shield. Well, then you'll hit them with 4 basic attacks which will deal the maximum amount of damage before they become falling to the ground again. That is then when you use Accio to keep them airborne, use 4 more basic attacks, and by the point that's done, your Levioso spell should be back off of recharge. By really working on this timing and not rushing, you'll have all your spells available at the end of each combination, and not rushing to extend this combination for as long as possible will give you the best chance of not only dealing the maximum amount of damage to your enemies, but having enough spells to then attack multiple enemies should they still be attacking you. It's also really important to use your Protego and Stupefy counterattack in that combo to help extend it for even more basic attacks. So make sure you're taking your time, do not rush through all your spells, otherwise you'll be left with not very much damage that you can actually do compared to if you had taken your time to use spells and weave in those basic attacks at the right time. This will also help your combat meter go up more, and we'll love that for ancient magic attacks. But tip number 2 actually deals with the multiple enemies that I was talking about, which early on is a massive problem, especially if you do the first couple of Crossed Wands events solo like I did on hard mode. I don't know why I did that. It can be a real challenge to deal with all those enemies at the same time. So here is tip number 2, and that is to line up your enemies. By having them in front of you, not only will you be able to see them line up their spells so that you can use Protego and Stupefy, but also you can switch between the targets so much easier than having to 180 to move to another target. In conjunction with tip number 1 about using your spells in a timely fashion, this also means you can switch between the target to use the appropriate shield breaking spell that you need to for them, and that is so much easier when they're in front of you. So many times would I get attacked by a goblin who can do the teleport slash move, and that would completely ruin my combo and ruin my flow of battle, as well as dealing insane damage on hard mode. So making sure I had my enemies in front of me was a massive step that I had to learn before actually being able to fight consistently. And there's different ways that you can do this. One of them is going to be just playing around the arena and kind of, not necessarily backing yourself into a corner, but moving around the edges of the map a little bit more so that they funnel in front of you. And then as you attack them and as you push them around with your different spells, you can make some ground up and push a bit forward. But the biggest issue you have is an enemy behind you, whether it be a goblin, whether it be a troll about to attack you, you don't know what kind of attack is incoming from behind, whether it be a spell you can Protego, or whether it be a blockable thing that means you have to react a lot faster. For example, with trolls, they can charge at you. So if you're doing a roll, you get the animation that there's an unblockable attack coming, and you roll forward, that troll's still going to hit you. So you need to know that you have to move to the side. Whereas a goblin, they might slash, and again, same thing, you have to roll to the side as opposed to rolling forward or rolling backwards, which would just cause more damage to you. So having these enemies in front of you is going to be so important at reducing the amount of damage you're taking and just help you generally within combat. Building on that is tip number 3, and that is to pay very close attention to the indicators you're getting. The indicator for a blockable attack that you can use Protego or Stupefy counterattack for comes as an orange marker above your head. A non-blockable attack is a very distinct red marker which you will need to roll away from if you want to avoid it. It is so important to pay attention to these markers, especially when you're in the heat of combat. You don't want to accidentally try and block an unblockable attack because you actually slow down time then and get affected by it even more. So it's a really, really dangerous move. So you need to pay attention to those markers. Not only that, but you need to pay attention to how many indicators you get for a blockable attack in one section. There are a couple enemies who will fire multiple attacks at you, which require you to do multiple blocks in the same animation. Especially if you're trying to counterattack, you can get held up in that animation quite a lot, and you need to know whether you're reacting to 2 attacks, 1 attack, or even more. And if you're ever unsure about what kind of attack is coming to you, just roll. Use roll as your default removal. It will get you out of the danger and block anything that's incoming. You just need to make sure you get out of there. One other thing that you need to pay attention for, and it's not necessarily an over-the-head indicator, is ground indicators. Some enemies do big AoE damage to you, whether it be spiders coming up from the floor, whether it be lightning attacks, whether it be just fire that they're going to shoot at you from underneath. You need to also pay attention to the ground you're standing on because you may need to get out of the way of that as well. This is something that isn't explained to you, but you'll notice very quickly when it destroys your health bar. So make sure you're paying attention to both your head and your feet, so that you can get out of the way of danger where you need to. Again, you can't Protego those ones. Anything Protegoable will come up as a marker above your head. So if it's a ground attack, make sure you get out of the way. Also be careful of airborne enemies. You can't quite see them, but you should see them jump up, and in which case you need to dip. If you have found these first 3 tips useful, make sure you drop a like on the video. Again, if we hit 100 likes, advanced tips, which, trust me, you'll need, because there's some pretty complicated stuff later on. But for tip number 4, please make sure you vary your spells. Now, I mentioned different enemies having different colored shields which relate to a specific spell or specific group of spells that you need to break here. So with that said, please make sure that you have a variety of skills on your spell diamonds. Early on in the game, you learn Protego and Accio very early on. You'll then pick up Incendio. But after that point, the next spells you learn generally are Defindo and Expelliarmus, which are also damage spells, which means you have 3 red spells, 1 yellow, 1 purple at a certain point in the game. And so you need to make sure you readjust your spell diamond accordingly so you don't just have all of those red spells. Even though they're very fun and do a lot of damage, they're not the best at helping you in combat because you need to break different shields. Also, it can be quite a while before you even unlock more spell diamonds through the talent tree. So please make sure you're being careful at reorganizing that 1 spell diamond you have early with the correct spells. Personally, if I was going to say do it, I would remove the Lumos and the Disillusionment Charm and all those non-offensive spells from your spell bar until you need them, and just put on Accio, Levioso, Incendio, and Expelliarmus until you pick up Defindo. And even when you pick up Defindo, I would wait till you have a new spell diamond before equipping Defindo, because the Accio Incendio combination is too good, and Expelliarmus might be the best spell in the game. But it's just so important early on that you do make sure you take care of that spell diamond to have 1 of each color, because those shields will come through, and if you don't have 1 of them, you're really stuck in combat. However, you can actually break shields with a Pugno, so that is one little extra tip you've got in here. If you are struggling to break a shield, your spell isn't up yet if you haven't listened to tip number 1. So you can use a Pugno, your Ancient Magic throw ability, to break certain shields as well. But then tip number 5 is my biggest saving tip for all of you guys just starting out, especially if you've done a Madness or gone on hard mode straight away and are struggling a little bit, and that is Wiggenweld Potion. Whether you loot it, brew it, or buy it, make sure you have a good supply of Wiggenweld Potions. It really sucks to get into some fights, especially some of the longer dungeons, and not have any with you, because you will take damage, and whilst your health does regenerate, in the middle of a fight it won't, especially when you have so many enemies on you. Wiggenweld Potion can save your life in a pinch. So please don't look over this point, especially if you're struggling with the combat. Make sure you do equip yourself with Wiggenweld Potions. Early on, it's something that I definitely found to be useful for me. It just helping keep me alive. I was spamming them a little bit. And remember, early on, they don't do a lot, so you might have to spam a few of them. But they are important to have. Make sure you are using them where appropriate. Again, if you finish combat, just let your health recharge. Don't waste any like I was doing. Just let your health regen. but still, make sure you have a good supply of these. These are really important. And by going to your first herbology and potions class, you'll be able to learn how to grow and then brew with the ingredients you need to make the Wiggenweld Potion. So maybe spend a little bit of time stacking up on these because they are really important. So that's it then, guys. They are my 5 big tips for beginners within Hogwarts Legacy. If you have found this useful, make sure you drop a like on the video. When we get to 100, advanced tips, which is going to be so helpful if you are looking to get into some of the meatier combat, some of those harder fights, especially if you put it on hard mode. There's some things in there that I've discovered that have been so beneficial to me, and to the point where I'm trying to flawless some of the Dark Arts battle arenas because I think they're possible. They're just really hard to get through. If you're looking for any more Hogwarts Legacy content before then though, make sure you subscribe to the channel and of course, click one of the videos on screen for a little bit more.